What happens when a privileged former royal steps into one of television's most brutal arenas? Tonight, we witnessed television history as Meghan Markle sat down with Bill Maher for what was supposed to be a simple interview, but quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night TV history. The tension was palpable from the moment she took the stage. By the end, security had to escort her out, while the audience erupted in chaos. But before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know your thoughts on celebrities who dodge tough questions. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this all unfolds. The HBO studio was buzzing with anticipation as Bill Maher prepared for what his producers had billed as a straightforward chat. Meghan Markle, dressed in an impeccably tailored cream blazer, likely worth more than most people's rent, settled into the guest chair, flashing a practiced smile that seemed polished by years of royal training. The crowd, a mix of Maher's usual politically savvy audience, offered polite applause as the cameras rolled. "So, Meghan," Maher began, leaning back in his chair with that signature smirk. "You've been pretty vocal about privacy lately, yet here you are on another talk show. How do you reconcile that?" The question hung in the air almost like a challenge. Meghan's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. Maher caught it. The cameras caught it. "Well, Bill, I think there's a difference between sharing your truth and having your privacy invaded," Meghan responded, her voice carrying that rehearsed royal perfect tone. "Your truth?" Maher repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting way to phrase it. So now there's more than one version of the truth?" A nervous laugh rippled through the audience and Meghan shifted in her seat, her designer heels clicking against the floor. "I think everyone has their own perspective on events, don't you?" she replied. "Sure," Maher shot back. "But facts are facts, right? I mean, either something happened or it didn't." Maher was warming up now, and anyone familiar with his style could tell where this was heading. For example, there were some pretty serious accusations Meghan and Harry made during that Oprah interview about racism within the royal family, but when it came time to name names, things got vague, didn't they? The temperature in the studio dropped several degrees. Meghan's media training kicked in. She straightened up, fixing Maher with a stare cold enough to freeze champagne. "I think what I shared with Oprah was very clear and very honest," she said, her voice sharpening, though she tried to mask it with forced calm. "Was it, though?" Maher pressed. "Because here's what I found interesting. You made bombshell claims about conversations regarding your son's skin color, but then you and Harry both said you wouldn't name names because it might be too damaging. Convenient, don't you think?" The audience fell completely silent. This was no longer the easy interview Meghan's team had likely expected. Her publicist, sitting in the front row, was frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to figure out how to get her client out of this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "I don't think there's anything convenient about protecting people who frankly don't deserve protection," Meghan replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The high road?" Maher repeated, laughing, but there was no humor in it. "You went on international television and essentially called the royal family racist. But you won't say who actually said what. That's not the high road. That's having your cake and eating it too." The carefully constructed facade Meghan had been holding onto was beginning to crack. Her jaw tightened and she gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. "I think you're mischaracterizing what happened," she said, her teeth clenched. "Am I?" Maher shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wanted all the drama and sympathy of being a victim, without any of the accountability that comes with making specific accusations." Her composure was slipping now. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Meghan snapped. "You don't know what it's like to be in that situation. To be trapped in an institution." "Trapped?" Maher interrupted. "You married into it willingly. Nobody forced you to become a royal. And when you didn't like it, you left. That's not being trapped. That's called making choices." The audience was hooked, eyes glued to the exchange. This was the kind of confrontation that made Maher's show must-see television. But it was clear that Meghan hadn't signed up for this level of scrutiny. "You're being incredibly reductive," she said, her voice rising slightly. "The situation was far more complex than you're making it out to be." "Then explain it," Maher challenged. "Make it less complex. Give me specifics. Who said what, when, where? Help me understand why I should believe these serious accusations without any actual details." Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She glanced around the studio, likely searching for an exit. But there was nowhere to run. The cameras were still rolling and Maher was just getting started. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Meghan finally spoke, her voice strained with barely contained frustration. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I'm on trial," Meghan said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "I came here to talk about my humanitarian work, not to rehash the past." Maher chuckled, shaking his head. "See, that's the problem right there. You can't drop bombshells about racism and then act like asking follow-up questions is somehow unfair. That's not how this works." "What's unfair is how you're twisting my words," Meghan shot back, her media training fully abandoned at this point. "I never said the royal family was racist. I said there were concerns about my son's skin color." "Oh, come on," Maher responded, his voice dripping with skepticism. "That's like saying you never called someone stupid. You just said they had intellectual concerns. It's the same thing, just dressed up in nicer language." The audience was glued to the exchange. What started as an interview had quickly morphed into a masterclass on how not to handle tough questions. Meghan's publicist had abandoned her phone by now and was staring at the stage, her face frozen in the look of someone watching a slow-motion car crash unfold. "You're putting words in my mouth," Meghan insisted, but her voice lacked the conviction it needed. She was clearly flustered, and Maher could smell blood in the water. "I'm using your words," Maher replied calmly. "Let me ask you this. If these conversations about your son's skin color weren't racist, then what were they? Meteorological discussions? Fashion consultations?" "You're being ridiculous," Meghan snapped, her composure cracking further. "Of course they were problematic, but you won't say who said them or what exactly was said," Maher interrupted. "So we're supposed to just take your word for it that something terrible happened, but we can't know any details because that would be too damaging to the people you're accusing?" "Yes, exactly," Meghan said, clearly not realizing how that sounded to anyone with half a brain. "Do you hear yourself right now?" Maher asked, genuinely incredulous. "You're asking people to believe serious allegations without providing any actual evidence. That's not how justice works. That's how witch hunts work." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no longer just tense television. It was a genuinely awkward moment. Meghan looked like she wanted to shrink into her chair and disappear. "I don't have to provide evidence to you or anyone else," she said, her voice taking on an imperious tone that reminded everyone watching exactly why she'd become such a controversial figure. "My truth is my truth." "There's that phrase again," Maher said, seizing on the opening. "Your truth. What happened to just plain old truth? You know, the kind that exists whether you believe it or not." "Truth is subjective," Meghan replied, and several people in the audience audibly groaned. "No, it's not," Maher said firmly. "Truth is objective. Interpretation is subjective. Perspective is subjective. But truth? Truth is truth. Either someone made racist comments about your son or they didn't. Either you were treated unfairly or you weren't. You can't have it both ways." Meghan was visibly struggling now. Her face was flushed and she kept glancing toward the exit, clearly calculating how fast she could make her escape. "I think this line of questioning is inappropriate," she said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I'm not going to be bullied on national television." "Bullied?" Maher laughed, his voice dripping with genuine amusement. "Lady, I'm asking you to explain statements you made publicly. If that's bullying, then every journalist in America is guilty of assault." "You're being deliberately obtuse," Meghan snapped. "You know exactly what you're doing." "Yeah, I do," Maher agreed. "I'm doing journalism. Remember that. It's where people ask questions and expect actual answers, not word salad about personal truth and subjective reality." The audience was silent now, hanging on every word. This had become one of those moments in television history that would be replayed for years, and everyone in the studio could feel it. "Let me try a different approach," Maher said, leaning forward with renewed interest. "You've talked a lot about how the media treated you unfairly. But isn't it true that you courted that same media when it suited your purposes? The carefully staged photos, the strategic leaks, the anonymous sources confirming your side of every story." Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. "That's absolutely not true." "Really?" Maher said, raising an eyebrow. "Because there's a pretty clear pattern here. When the coverage was positive, you were happy to engage with the press. When it turned negative, suddenly they were all racist and sexist. Isn't that a bit convenient?" "You have no idea what you're talking about," Meghan said, her voice rising dangerously. The harassment I faced was unprecedented. Was it, though? Maher challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got the same treatment every other celebrity gets. You just didn't like it, and instead of developing thicker skin, you played the victim card. That seemed to be the final straw. Meghan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, she declared, her voice shaking with rage. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity that— Oh, here we go, Maher interrupted, clearly enjoying himself. Now when all else fails, break out the buzzwords. What's next? Are you going to tell me I'm mansplaining? You are mansplaining, Meghan shot back, pointing an accusatory finger at him. You're sitting there dismissing my experiences, talking over me, and acting like you know better than I do about my own life. The audience was riveted. This had officially become the most uncomfortable interview in television history, and it was about to get even worse. I'm not dismissing your experiences, Maher said, his voice cold and deliberate. Meghan remained standing, slightly swaying, her composure barely intact. I'm questioning your interpretation of them. There's a distinction, and the fact that you can't see it, that's the real issue. Meghan hesitated, as if caught between sitting back down or storming off the stage. Her publicist had stood up, her hands frantic, clearly signaling that the situation was spiraling out of control. You know what? Meghan shot back, her voice thick with sarcasm. I should have known better than to expect a thoughtful conversation from someone who makes a career out of mocking people on TV. The audience gasped. It was so quiet in the studio you could hear a pin drop. Maher's eyebrow arched, a slow, almost amused smile creeping across his face. Mocking people? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Lady, I've been doing political commentary for 30 years. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel laureates, and actual intellectuals. What I don't do is coddle celebrities who think their feelings are more important than facts. Meghan's voice wavered, raw with indignation. You think systemic racism is just about feelings? You think someone reaching the point of suicidal thoughts is just a matter of feelings? Maher cut her off, his tone biting. I think using serious issues like mental health and racism as shields to deflect valid criticism is disgusting. He paused, his gaze unwavering. And I think someone who truly cared about those issues would welcome an honest conversation, instead of hiding behind buzzwords and victimhood. Meghan recoiled, as if physically struck by his words. How dare you question my mental health struggles? I'm not questioning your mental health, Maher said, rising to his feet now, his voice just as sharp. I'm questioning your integrity. There's a difference. Though I'm starting to wonder if you even know what that word means. The tension in the studio was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Security guards shifted nervously, ready in case things escalated beyond words. You're a misogynistic bully, Meghan spat, shaking with fury. And this is exactly why women don't speak out about their experiences. Because men like you tear them down, question everything they say. Men like me? Maher laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean men who ask follow-up questions? Men who expect consistency in your story? Men who don't just accept whatever you say because you're a woman? Meghan seized on that. You're proving my point, she said, her voice rising with triumph. You can't handle a strong woman speaking her truth. That phrase again, Maher muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Your truth. He paused, his voice lowering with frustration. You know what? I'm done pretending that's a real thing. Truth isn't personal. Truth isn't subjective. Truth is what actually happened, not what you wish happened or what fits your narrative. My narrative? Meghan's voice cracked, almost shrill. You think surviving institutional racism is just a narrative? You think being abandoned by my own family is just a narrative? Maher's voice was cold and precise. I think you're very good at reframing every criticism as an attack on your identity. Can't question your story because that's racist. Can't ask for details because that's sexist. Can't expect consistency because that's victim blaming. It's convenient, but it's not convincing. Meghan looked around the studio, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her rescue. But the audience remained frozen, and even her publicist looked like she wanted to disappear under her chair. I'm not going to stand here and be attacked, Meghan said, grabbing her purse and standing to leave. This is harassment, plain and simple. Harassment? Maher's voice was incredulous. You agreed to do this interview. You came on my show. Nobody forced you to be here, and nobody's forcing you to stay. But don't act like tough questions equal persecution. These aren't tough questions, Meghan snapped. These are gotcha questions designed to make me look bad. This is exactly the kind of media manipulation that drove me out of public life in the first place. No, Maher shot back. What drove you out of public life was your inability to handle the scrutiny that comes with being a public figure. You wanted all the perks of celebrity without any of the accountability. I didn't, Meghan began, but her voice lacked conviction. It was clear she was rattled, isn't it? Maher pressed. You wanted the platform. You wanted the influence. You wanted the adoration. But the moment people started asking tough questions, you cried racism and ran away. That's not courage, that's cowardice. I'm not a coward, Meghan said, her voice dangerously low. I am a survivor. Survivor of what exactly? Maher asked, his tone biting. A life of incredible privilege? A brief stint in one of the world's most prestigious institutions? A marriage to a prince? There are people fighting real oppression who would kill for the opportunities you've had. That seemed to be the last straw. Meghan turned toward the exit without another word, her heels clicking sharply on the studio floor. But Maher wasn't finished. You know what the real tragedy is? He called after her. You could have been a force for positive change. You had a platform people would have killed for, but instead of using it to lift others up, you used it to tear down anyone who dared question your version of events. Meghan stopped walking, but didn't turn around. For a moment, it looked like she might respond, might actually engage with the criticism, but instead she squared her shoulders and continued toward the exit. This interview is over, she announced coldly, her voice echoing in the now silent studio. No, Maher said, settling back into his chair with a satisfied smile. Now it's over. As Meghan was escorted out by security, the audience sat in stunned silence. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of what was sure to go down as one of the most explosive interviews in television history. And there you have it. Folks, the narrator said, his voice calm and steady. What happens when entitlement meets accountability? When victim status meets real journalism? When someone used to controlling the narrative finally meets someone who refuses to play along? This was television at its rawest, most unfiltered. Whether you love Bill Maher or hate him, you have to admit, he asked the questions that no one else dared.